Hello, everybody. Welcome to the latest edition of the Post with BP. I'm your host, Billy Parvatam, folks. I'm so excited today to be joined by Mr. Gary Dolphin, the longtime voice of the Iowa Hawkeyes since 1996. He's a native of Cascades, Iowa, and it's such a pleasure to be chatting with him today. Mr. Dolphin, thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure, Billy. Good to be with you. I've been to Blacksburg any number of times as a broadcaster, certainly, but also I'm a huge Civil War buff, military history fanatic, in particular, with an emphasis on the Civil War. So I've been up and down I-81 a number of times and stopped and took in the sights in Blacksburg. I got a couple good friends who work for the university out there, and good to be with you and talk all things VaTech and Iowa.
For sure. Well, I want to start off with first, how have you been handling this pandemic? I mean, this is something that has impacted our lives both professionally and personally the last over 12 months now. So how have you been handling this last 13, 14 months?
I suppose, like everybody else, stunned at first, realized the difficulty of navigating through a pandemic. I mean, we hadn't had one since 1918, and all I can do and all you can do is read about that when World War I was here. So it was just one of those unknowns, kind of like playing an opponent without a scouting report. You have no idea what's coming at you. And so we were all, crossing our fingers and hoping that the vaccine, first off, that they would be able to create a vaccine and that it would get here sooner than later. And I thought it was just an amazing performance by our medical scientists, not only in this country, but throughout the world, that they were able to come up with a vaccine or an antidote that quickly and timely. And hopefully everybody gets vaccinated. But, on the field, it just shut down everything. Every sport on every college campus was put on hold. Some were eliminated, including here at the University of Iowa. So it really, Billy, to answer your question, I think in a sense would be it changed our lives for the rest of our lives and hopefully for the better in the long run.
For sure. And I was curious, how did this opportunity first open up at the University of Iowa? Because I was reading, Mr. Dolphin, that you were one of 63 applicants, if I'm not mistaken, for this job. So how did this open up and how did you ultimately secure the position?
Yeah, one of 63, I guess what they considered serious candidates. As you know, there's only 320 Division I basketball teams, and I think just north of 120 Division I football teams. So out of those roughly 450, 500 jobs, 300 million people in our country, there aren't many of these type jobs around. So when indeed they come open, everybody who has a desire and a big heart for broadcasting and journalism thinks they can do the job, and rightfully so. You have to feel that you can handle the job before you ever apply for it. I was well along in my career, honestly. The University of Iowa, I had covered for the better part of 25 or 30 years, through local radio, local television. I grew up 60 miles from Iowa City. So my folks were season ticket holders. We were all Hawk fans. That wasn't an issue at all. And therefore, I followed Iowa and knew the ins and outs, the nuances of every one of their star players. That was due in large part, that had a lot to do with my broadcast career because I would listen to the great Iowa announcers, the great announcers from around the country, like Lindsey Nelson and Dick Enberg and people like that that I grew up listening to. I thought, man, I want to be like them. Wouldn't that be fun to do that? I understand it doesn't pay great cash. You're not going to run out and buy a yacht after your first couple of years on the job. But, I never had money to begin with, so I'm not worried about that. It's provided me a very handsome living over the years. But to have the opportunity to even apply for the Iowa job, and quite honestly, I never applied for the job. I got a call from a member of the search committee. We're talking 1995, 96 here. And his question, and I knew this gentleman well from my days of covering Iowa, as I previously mentioned, in the late 70s through the 80s when Hayden Fry arrived. Lute Olson was coaching basketball at Iowa at the time, and they were on a really good run. And I was doing Northwestern. I was doing Northwestern in Chicago. I was in the Big Ten, covering the Big Ten. And I was also working on the side for the Chicago Bears for 10 years during the Ditka, Dave Wanstead era. So I was having a good time in the Windy City and not looking for another job. And reading kind of, with some giddiness about all the names that supposedly had applied for the Iowa job, from Kevin Harlan to Wayne Larrabee and a lot of good other talented announcers that nobody's ever heard of. And knowing, I assume that Iowa at the time had three main radio networks. So they were the last holdout, Billy, in terms of exclusivity. And Bob Bowlesby, who's the Big 12 commissioner, was the athletic director at Iowa at the time. And there was just too much money being left on the table every year by these networks that were coming in saying, "Hey, we'd love to have the exclusive rights to Iowa football and basketball. Here's $1.2 million, $1.3 million." When Bob Bowlesby knew he was collectively from those three small radio networks getting about $300,000 in rights fees. Well, how long can you turn your nose up at $700,000-800,000 net profit to the bottom line? So ultimately, they decided they have to go exclusive. But what I didn't know is they didn't feel they could give the play-by-play job to A over B over C, that they would hire a new play-by-play announcer and keep the great Ed Podolak as a football analyst and Bobby Hansen as the basketball analyst. So when my friend called me up and let me know he was on the selection committee and asked why I hadn't applied, I told him, I said, look, I'm not going to play that political game. I'm 45 years old. I'm well along in my career. I'm happy here in Chicago. Plus, I know you're just going to give it to Jim Zabel or Bob Brooks or Ron Gonder. And he said, no, we've decided we need to hire a new play-by-play announcer. Well, then I was all in. I jumped in with both feet. And ultimately, they only interviewed two of us, myself and Jim Rose, who's been a longtime play-by-play announcer for Nebraska, great baseball play-by-play announcer. Jim had done some backup football and basketball games for the University of Iowa out of Omaha, which isn't too far from Des Moines or Iowa City. So I went in for an interview, a 2-hour interview over the Thanksgiving holiday, and got a call 3 weeks later. Hey, we want to offer you the next voice of the Iowa Hawkeyes position. So I gave the thumbs up to my wife, who was standing in the kitchen while I was on the phone, and the rest is history, as they say.
That's awesome. And I was wondering, what are some of your favorite memories covering the Hawkeyes over these past 25 years? I mean, I think they've made a bowl game pretty much every year. They've been to 7 NCAA tournament appearances. I mean, what stands out to you in terms of what you've enjoyed covering with the Hawkeyes?
You mentioned 25 years. It's hard to pick one or two games out of 25 years, due in fact, large part to the great success that Hayden Fry, I had the last 2 or 3 years of Hayden's career at Iowa, and then all of Kirk Ferentz's career. And Kirk's now top 5 in the history of the game in terms of most victories, top 4 or 5 in the Big Ten. And he's a certain first ballot Hall of Famer when that day comes. He's far from concluding his coaching career, though. And, first off, the big picture, when you think of what Hayden Fry has meant to Iowa football or Iowa athletics in terms of the revenue that football produces, and you look at the staff that he put together, there are now or will be 5 coaches off his staff of, at the time, was 9 people who are in the College Football Hall of Fame or will be. Let's see if I can peel them off here. Well, Hayden is in the Hall of Fame, certainly. Bob Stoops, Bill Snyder, Barry Alvarez, and Kirk Ferentz whenever that day comes. And that leaves out Dan McCarney and Brett Bielema and Mark Stoops. It goes to show, whether it's in football, banking, or owner of a company, if you don't surround yourself with good people, you've got no chance. So to be an analyzer of talent was really a key for Hayden Fry, not only on players, but on guys that he hired. Hayden always told me he hires a guy for 3 reasons. He wants a teacher first, a recruiter second, and a coach third. The coach meaning if you're a good enough recruiter and a good enough teacher, you'll be able to develop the football player as an assistant coach. And of course, Kirk Ferentz is one of the best. But if you had to pin me down and pick a football game and a basketball game, certainly everybody wants to, if you're an Iowa fan, you want to talk about the last play of the Capital One Bowl in 2006 when Drew Tate, on the last play of the game, went up top to Warren Holloway. He pump fake left. Clinton Solomon took double coverage. And little used Warren Holloway, who had walked on, streaked right down the opposite side hash mark. They had a freshman safety at LSU. Remember, they were 13-0 the year before. Nick Saban was the head coach. And when Drew pump faked that way, the young safety bit, and Warren ran down the hash mark untouched, and we could all see it coming. And I was so excited. It was at the end of the game. It was starting to get dark down in in Orlando. And I couldn't see who caught the ball. And when he did catch it, he was mobbed immediately in the end zone. It was a dog pile. But I was smart enough to go touchdown, Iowa, Hawks win, Hawks win. So even if we didn't know who caught the ball initially, the fans and the listening audience knew that Iowa had won the game. So that would be probably my highlight for football. There were many great Big Ten victories. As you know, bowl games, unless it's a national championship game or a playoff game, bowl games really don't mean anything other than it's a reward for the players in the program and the fans. They get to go to some nice warm spot, typically, for a season well done. So to me, if I had more to list a more significant game or two, it probably would come from the Big Ten and the West Division. Some great games with Nebraska and Wisconsin and Northwestern down through the years. But certainly everybody wants to talk. I've got more ringtones on cell phones with the last play of the Capital One Bowl. So I guess, Billy, that qualifies as a great call. Basketball, it's really a no-doubter. It was Dr. Tom Davis, Coach Tom Davis last year, 1998, and he had been told that they were going to go in another direction at the end of the season, and Steve Alford was going to come in and be the new Iowa coach. The Hawks went to Kansas that December before the conference season started. Kansas was coached by Roy Williams. Kansas had won 68 consecutive home games in that storied, infamous field house. And the Hawks went in, got down by 18 early in the second half. And Kent McCausland hit like back-to-back-to-back threes. All of a sudden, the Jayhawks went, wait a minute, this is not supposed to be happening. And with Jess Settles and Dean Oliver and some other terrific players, Iowa roared all the way back, ended up winning the game by 4 points to end KU's 68-game win streak. So I guess that would have to be my basketball highlight.
You've had a chance to cover some incredible athletes during your time at Iowa. And I wanted to ask you if you could share either a personal story, maybe a moment on the field that you could share about them. And speaking of which, tight ends, some of the tight ends you've gotten to see are pretty incredible. I have to start with George Kittle, obviously one of the best tight ends in the NFL right now with the 49ers. He played his collegiate career with the Hawkeyes. What stands out to you about George Kittle?
Just his enthusiasm and his energy for the game. George loves playing football. I know his dad very well, Bruce Kittle, who was a great football player for Hayden Fry at Iowa. He was an even better wrestler for Dan Gable. Now think about that. Iowa is in a unique situation in that because of Coach Gable, I can name you 5 or 6 great football players that came to Iowa. Now this is back in the 70s and 80s, and Gable talked them into coming out for wrestling right after football ended. And in those days, wrestling really didn't get revved up till late November. So they could compete in football. Kittle was an offensive tackle. And then he'd cut 30 or 40 pounds and go over at still wrestle heavyweight for Iowa or 190 and was throwing guys all over the mat. So there's a great bond, a great unison between football and wrestling, thanks in large part to Dan Gable. Of course, if you're Hayden Fry or Kirk Ferentz, you're going to tell Dan Gable that, no, you can't have my guy. But of course, with injuries now being what they are, and wrestling being as vicious as it is, there are very few at least good football players that are going to go wrestle too. But there's so many characters that I've covered. George is a character, and to think about George Kittle, he didn't log a ton of minutes at Iowa because he had these nagging ankle injuries, and he had a shoulder. But nobody ever questioned his ability to play the game. I always thought he could be a high hurdler, the way he could jump over defenders. And George wasn't the biggest tight end like we're used to seeing at Iowa. George probably played conservatively at 240 pounds. So he was kind of a hybrid receiver, like an H-back, but they'd line him up in the slot like they did Dallas Clark, like they did TJ Hawkinson, like they did Noah Fant. I mean, it goes on and on and on when you look at the great tight ends at Iowa. George Kittle, Dallas Clark was always my favorite because he walked on at Iowa. So did George Kittle, for that matter. Hawkinson was highly recruited. Noah Fant was a 4 or 5-star recruit. But you got to have a special place for kids that grew up in small town, typically small town Iowa, like Dallas Clark. George Kittle, his daddy grew up in Iowa, but George was from Oklahoma, where he was born and raised. But very humble beginnings, humble family, and we're very grateful and happy for their success they're now enjoying.
And I was going to ask you, how do you kind of compare all those tight ends? I mean, you mentioned all of them: Kittle, Dallas Clark, T.J. Hawkinson, Noah Fant. I mean, is there a way you rank them? I mean, were they pretty similar players? Like, how do you rank all of them as Iowa tight ends?
Well, it's hard to rank them. It may be hard to top Dallas Clark. I mean, he probably will make the NFL Hall of Fame. He was the tight end of the year and the Mackey Award winner in college football. And the one common thread in all these guys, T.J. Hawkinson grew up in a small town, and I'm not here to promote small town Iowa all day, but the common thread is their values. Their appreciation for what the game of football is. Yeah, it's about the money and it's about the fame and it's about winning Super Bowls and Big Ten championships, but the love of the game is what stands out to me about. Now, Noah Fant grew up in Omaha, but his passion for football, and obviously they know Iowa is a developmental school, particularly at the tight end position. But Kirk Ferentz, an old offensive line coach, is insistent that his tight ends, they stand them up, as you know, at the line of scrimmage, and there's a good reason for that. They want them, well, they don't stand them up anymore. Hayden Fry stood him up because he wanted the tight ends to look at that defense at eye level for blocking purposes. So at Iowa, you better be able to block before you catch, because that is more important, because the Hawks are always going to run the football. They're always going to be two backs, tailback, a fullback, two tight ends. That slot receiver better be able to block. That is in the view of Hayden Fry and in the mind of Kirk Ferentz. That is what Big Ten football is all about. Hayden Fry told me once, September and October are beautiful around here, and they are in Blacksburg. But he said, when you get to November and the sky's gray and that wind is howling, and the wind chill is probably down around 10 or 15 above zero, and you put that rock hard, or that cold hand and knuckles in that rock hard dirt, you better be able to block that guy across the line of scrimmage from you, or that little old running back doesn't have a chance. And that's how you score. You got to be able to run the ball, because swirling winds of the Midwest, upper Midwest in November, late November, are cause for many interceptions and the many demise of quarterbacks.
For sure. And I have to ask you about basketball player. You just saw him, Luka Garza. I mean, a star of the Iowa Hawkeyes men's basketball team. I mean, what stands out to you about Luke?
It's interesting you bring Luka up after George Kittle, because what was Kittle, a 5th-round draft pick? As I remember, I think he was a 5th-round draft pick. He just signed a $75-80 million contract here in the last year. Same story line with the Luka Garza, even though he grew up in D.C. in the Maryland area, metro area, great player coming out of high school, wasn't widely recruited until Fran McCaffrey offered him his sophomore year. Then everybody jumped on board, although Luka's still irritated that Maryland never came forth with a bid. Now, I know Mark Turgeon well, and I'm sure Mark, once he committed to Iowa, most coaches, at least those above board with great character, okay, if he calls me and wants to come to Maryland, I'll talk to him. Otherwise, they're not going to step on other people's toes. But Luka was a kid who became the player he is because of his work ethic, not unlike George Kittle. Luka knew that he wasn't going to outjump a lot of these great athletes. He wasn't going to, out his athleticism, whatever that is. Isn't what some of the big post players we see around college basketball in the Big Ten are. But he's got it right here. He's got it in the heart, baby. He will outwork you. He'll get up 1,000 more jump shots in practice, and that's why you're seeing the player, the multi-dimensional player that he is. 6'11", 260 pounds, and can step out and hit the three. They like to say he has the Jack Sikma step back jumper, not only mid range, but you watched him, you heard him hit all those threes this year. Probably the best post big man 3-point shooter in college basketball. And oh, by the way, he got 9.5 rebounds a game. And oh, by the way, he shot 60%. And oh, by the way, he got many putbacks for baskets. And many a coach told me around the Big Ten in particular, but as the season wore on, or as his career wore on, the thing that impressed coaches, opposing coaches, most about Luka Garza was the turnovers that he prevented. And by that, they were talking about he made more great catches of bad passes. Now, if you're an Iowa perimeter player, you're told, get that ball. It's got to go inside out. Get the ball to Luka Garza. Well, the opposing defenders know that the ball's coming to Luka, so they'd engulf him with a three team or a double team, or they'd get physical with him. But Connor McCaffrey, Jordan Bohannon, Keegan Murray, Joe Toussaint, they're still going to try and get that ball into Luka. So they're not going to throw it right to his chest. It was over his head. It was wide right. This kid, big hands, made more tremendous catches of balls that were sailing out of bounds or into the seats than anybody I've ever seen at that position. And not only did he save the turnover, but all in one fell swoop, he'd go up and dunk it or lay it in off the glass. I am so privileged to have been able to call his games for 4 years. And, his freshman and sophomore years, Billy, he averaged 12 points, 4.5, 5, 6 rebounds. They weren't Pete Maravich type numbers, but he kept working at his game, wanting to improve. His dad was a terrific player at Idaho. His grandpa was a wonderful player on the West Coast. It's that work ethic instilled in Luka Garza that made him what he is. And I'll be forever grateful that I had the opportunity to call not only his game for 4 years, but Jordan Bohannon, who now has decided to come back, meaning at the end of next year, not that he's about numbers, Jordan will own the all-time Big Ten record for three-point makes. So I've seen the best of inside and I've seen the best of outside at Iowa.
That's awesome. Now I was curious, how do you describe working with the coaches you work with? You mentioned Kirk Ferentz, the longest tenured coach in FBS, and Fran McCaffrey, who's been at Iowa for a number of years. I mean, how do you describe what it's like to work with those guys, two respected coaches, and you have a chance to see them in more personal settings that most people don't have a chance to see them in?
Very blessed. And, I'm a people person, so I love everybody I run into. I try to befriend them immediately, try not to burn bridges. Now, granted, I've gotten in a trouble a couple times with some words and some terms that I've used that, when I was growing up, they were acceptable. And I've recognized my ill ways and my mistakes made and apologized and moved on. And the coaches that I've worked with have been there for me, most notably Coach McCaffrey here of late. Kirk Ferentz, they don't come any better than him. He grew up in Western Pennsylvania. Fran's a Philadelphia guy, so we have fun there. Pittsburgh versus Philly, as you know, they don't get along the best. East side to the west side of the great Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So we have fun with that. Steve Alford, the golden boy from Newcastle, Indiana. Bobby Knight's hand-picked guy, the great All-American. Steve's proof that you can be a great athlete and still be an outstanding head coach. And he's had a wonderful career. People forget he averaged 20, 21 wins over 8 seasons at Iowa. Now, he didn't get to the NCAA tournament enough, but who does? We never get there enough unless you're Duke or Kansas or one of the blue bloods, Kentucky. But as we saw with Kentucky and Duke, they can have their dips too, as well as KU. But that's what makes college basketball a great game. College football, of course, Hayden Fry was, I knew Hayden for a number of years before I got this job. And thing about Hayden is he was you talk about people person. I promise you, if he was sitting in my seat today doing this interview with you, Billy, and you ended the interview and, thanked each other and turned the camera off, and you didn't see Hayden for another 5-6 years, and you bumped into him walking down the street, the first thing he'd say is, "Hey, Billy, how you doing? How you doing, Billy boy?" The guy, the most amazing snake oil salesman I've ever run into, that would never forget a first name. It's incredible. I've never seen a human being with that kind of recall. And he had to have a trick up his sleeve. He's an old West Texas boy. I don't know how he did it, but he was amazing. I saw him do that a number of times when I was emceeing a program and introducing Coach. He might be the most unique individual who we ever called a head coach. Fran McCaffrey certainly is the most intense. He and Tom Davis, Tom kind of kept the fire burning inside. Fran has gotten better in controlling his emotions, but, basketball is a tough game to coach. And so Fran will get after the officials and after his players. But I've had a half a dozen coaches. Todd Licklider was very laid back, a real gentleman coach. And in football, I've only had two in 25 years, so I'm pretty impressed and blessed there. And coaches are a unique breed. Boy, they and their staffs work 24/7, not just during the season, but around the clock. You have to do that now to be successful, with social media being what it is. That's why these staffs have grown so large, because most major colleges have a group of 5 or 6 people who do nothing but social media. That's where kids live these days, as you know.
And I was curious because I talked to John Walters from Iowa State, and I kind of asked him how he would describe the Iowa-Iowa State rivalry. And he said, it's intense, but I think it's a pretty respectful rivalry. As the voice of the Hawkeyes, how do you describe that great rivalry in the state of Iowa?
I would agree with John's comments, and trust me, it wasn't always that way. I've been at Iowa a lot longer than John's been play-by-play at Iowa State. He does a great job, and we get along well. And I've said this historically. You think about this: Iowa is a state of 3 million people total, and we've got 3 major universities, not counting Drake. You've got Iowa, Iowa State, the University of Northern Iowa, and Drake University. So you've got 4 Division I schools. One's an FCS school, granted, but you know what Northern Iowa's football program and basketball program are like. They recruit high caliber athletes. So you've got a state of 3 million people and four mouths at the recruit feeding trough. So it gets pretty combative and competitive, and yet all 4 continue to do well, consistently well. Of course, Iowa State's got it going in football now with Matt Campbell. They just hired a new head basketball coach, and TJ Otzelberger, but Iowa State has great basketball tradition. Iowa has wonderful basketball and football tradition. So it's been a knockdown drag-out, especially in football the last number of years. And I would say this, I've been following Iowa State since the series renewed in 1977. And it's been very, very bitter off and on. But the last, 10, 15 years, Dan McCarney, a former Hayden Fry disciple who played at Iowa, who was a longtime assistant coach at Iowa, went to Iowa State as the head coach, left Wisconsin as defensive coordinator. And it all changed when Dan McCarney got to Iowa State. That really leveled the playing field. Iowa had won 15 straight games in that football series. Now, Johnny Orr was coaching basketball then at Iowa State, so he kind of had the upper hand, or it was kind of a draw with he and Tom Davis. But you can see the competitive nature of these coaches transcends the competitive nature of the kids on the field or on the court. And, of course, the majority of the kids on the rosters are from Iowa, from small-town Iowa to Des Moines to Cedar Rapids. And, boy, that week, let me tell you, and I've said this, it's Army, Navy, it's USC, UCLA, it's Georgia, Georgia Tech, Florida State. But what's unique about Iowa, other than the fact that there are only 3 million people in the states, the line's drawn in the sand. What's unique about Iowa is nowhere else do you have a state with 2 schools in different Power 5 conferences, the Big 12 and the Big 10, that line up and go after each other each year. I've always found that one of the unique characteristics of this rivalry.
What are some of your favorite stadiums to broadcast from around the country? I mean, you're in the Big 10, which is a great conference, and then you go to great out-of-conference schedules like the Big 12 with Iowa State. I mean, what are some of the great stadiums you like to go and broadcast a game, or even just have a chance to go out and see the town and city afterwards?
Yeah, I mean, I've called a game in Yankee Stadium. I grew up Mickey Mantle. Mickey Mantle was my hero growing up. So I mean, I love baseball. You can't come from the Midwest. The Field of Dreams is 15 miles from my house. So if you ever get out here to Dubuque along the Mississippi River, a beautiful part of the country, I'll take you out there and give you a personal tour of the Field of Dreams. And the Yankees and the White Sox are going to play. I think it's August 12th out there. I'm still looking for a ticket for that game, but I'm getting off track here. But great stadiums. Certainly Yankee Stadium was a great thrill for me personally, but football stadiums, I mean, other than Kinnick Stadium, built in 1929, Kinnick Stadium is unique, unlike any other stadium in the Big Ten, in that back in those days when all the great buildings were put together, Camp Randall in Madison, the Horseshoe in Columbus, Michigan's, Michigan Stadium. Iowa was the only one to build just a football stadium. Most of the other stadiums had an 8-lane, 6-lane, or an 8-lane track around the field. Iowa does not. So you're 15 to 20 feet away from the sidelines, or the benches, more importantly. So if you're a visiting team, you've got, as Norm Parker used to say, I turn around, I see a lot of inebriated deer hunters in this orange hunting gear, top to bottom in November. Norm used to come in here with Michigan State back when George Perlis, another Hall of Fame coach, was patrolling the sidelines for the Spartans. Norm was his linebacker coach, and of course turned out to be a great defensive coordinator at Iowa. But it's unique in and of itself, Kinnick Stadium, named after the great Niall Kinnick, the war hero. But I would have to, honestly, there's nothing like going to the Horseshoe in Columbus, okay? And it seats 110,000 people, whatever. And I say that because of the meter. It moves the needle in terms of loudness. And here's why. The Horseshoe is cantilevered. In other words, the stadium seats go back. They start, at the sidelines. They go back, they come up and under, and then at the top of the stadium, the roofs cantilever out over the field. So when that crescendo, when that loud roar goes up, it hits the undercarriage of that roof and comes right back down on top of you. And it's on. And when they the pregame, they're doing the Script Ohio, where the band is writing out the great state of Ohio on the field. When they dot that I mean, it's like 50 F-16s flew over right in front of you. It's incredible. Camp Randall Stadium would probably be my second favorite. Memorial Stadium in Lincoln is truly unique, given the history of that program. I mean, Michigan Stadium, what can you say? 115,000. Penn State. I love the whiteout days, whiteout nights at Penn State. The Big Ten, because it's the oldest, by far the oldest conference in America, Billy, has the most unique characteristics in their stadiums than any place I've ever been. And I've been to the Rose Bowl. I've been down south. I've been to every corner of the country, and there's nothing like a college football stadium on Saturday afternoon. It's just so unique. It's what Americana. It's a huge piece of Americana.
Mr. Dolphin, you've been so gracious with your time. I have two final questions for you. My first one is, what's your advice to aspiring sportscasters trying to make it in this business? I mean, you know better than anyone, it's already a competitive business. I mean, your Iowa job, there were 63 applicants for one of the most prestigious jobs in the country. And now this last year, we've had to deal with the realities of this pandemic. So what's your advice to young guys and girls like me who want to make it in this field? And
what you didn't mention is social media. Now, I first started in broadcasting in 1971, and I can tell you there was no such thing as the internet, social media. You got the three, you've heard your grandpa say, you got three channels on your TV, NBC, ABC, and CBS. That has been the most incredible happening in my career, has been the invention of social media. And Google and Amazon and Walmart. I mean, it's just incredible the way. And so I bring that up because it's not just about radio anymore. It's not just about television. You can make a very handsome living in the arts by by mastering all there is to know about social media. You're enjoying that today with this Zoom conference. Who knew what Zoom was until a year ago? So the pandemic has created this incredible Zoom a tool that we can use. I finally got to interview Coach Ferentz face to face last Saturday prior to the spring football game. And we got done, and he's got a great sense of humor. Loki, he looks at me, he goes, "Wasn't this fun?" I go, "What, Coach, our visit?" "Oh, no, our visit face to face." Now, we were 6 feet apart. We both had our shots, but he said, if I never do another Zoom, he said, I'll be happy. And if I never see another cardboard cutout in the stands, I'll be. Now, he's old fashioned like I am, but you stop and think about that. We haven't been face to face for the better part of a year. But that said, as Coach Ferentz likes to say, let's be honest, the internet is here to stay. So that's the first thing I would tell a young man your age or a young woman aspiring to be in the media, to carve your niche out in social media. There's so much out there beyond radio and TV. Now, like you want to be a play-by-play guy or an analyst or a radio announcer. That's still all good and well. But you walk into any radio station today, the staffs are maybe a third of what they were because everything's automated. Everything's going, clicking or cued by computer, pre-programmed, information technology. I'm not happy about that. I like personality radio, but that's the world we live in. So yes, go after your what you aspire to be, whether it's in radio, TV, but don't forget about print, the digital age that we live in, the computer technology that's out there. I like to say everybody now thinks they can be a journalist because they got a blog or they got a website or they do Zooms. That's true. You think you can be one, but not everybody can be one. You're on the right track by doing real life experiences like this today. But if radio and TV is your thing, go after it. There's still great journalism schools out there, but don't lose sight of the internet and all that social media brings to the table.
My final question for you, Mr. Dolphin, as you reflect on your career, are you pretty content with how everything's played out? I mean, you've been at Iowa for 25 years now. You were at Northwestern before that. You've seen so many great moments, worked with great coaches and great players. I mean, is there something you wish you could have done? Any regrets? Or all being said, happy to have been at Iowa for the last quarter century?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think I've ever been asked that, Billy, but it's an easy answer for me because when you grow up in Iowa, it's all about baseball. And, truth be known, if I were to rank the sports as a fan, true love, baseball would be number one. I broadcast 5 years of minor league baseball earlier in my career. So if I had one regret, it would be that I haven't called a 7-game World Series where the Yankees win on a home run by Aaron Judge in the bottom of the 9th inning. That would be my one regret. I would love to do professional baseball, not necessarily Major League Baseball. I mean, certainly we all would. But what I've always found unique about baseball is that, and not unlike football, is that between every pitch, between every snap of the football, you've got 20 to 25 seconds to talk about what just happened and about what might be happening next. Baseball is such a mysterious game because of a great pitcher will have 3 or 4 pitches. Hitters all attack the baseball differently. Baseball, I guess it's America's game. It's the oldest game, but that would be my one regret, that if I could, after my football and basketball career is over, and I don't have any regrets there, certainly, that I could do Major League Baseball for a few years, just to say I've done it, and I've seen the greatest athletes in the world play baseball between the lines.
Mr. Dolphin, this has been such a pleasure getting to talk to you about your wonderful career, all the great stories and insights and the people you've covered. Thank you so much for your time today. It was such a great pleasure to chat with you.
My pleasure, Billy. Good luck with your journalism career, not only at Virginia Tech, but going forward. Say hi to Cordell Pemsel when you see him. He's one of my favorites. Played basketball at Iowa before moving on to Blacksburg. Tell Cordell hi for me. And anytime, happy to jump on with you.
For sure. That's Mr. Gary Dolphin, the longtime voice of the Iowa Hawkeyes since 1996. He's been there for 25 years, a native of the great state of Iowa. Thanks so much to him for joining me on the latest edition of The Pulse with BP. Thanks to everybody for joining us. We'll see you next time.